We are conducting this meeting virtually. To ensure public access to the deliberations of the meeting, the public may access this call through video, conferencing, or telephone. Following the presentation by the petitioner and questions from the commission, members of the public will have the opportunity to ask questions and provide public comment. Please identify yourself with name and address for the record. You can also raise your hand from your phone by dialing *9. All video screens will be turned off with the exception of the commissioners, Delia, and the current petitioner. Once the commission has acted on the application, the petitioner is free to leave the meeting. Screen sharing will not be permitted unless absolutely necessary. All votes will be taken by roll call vote. In the event of any technical difficulties, all matters on the agenda that have not been heard will automatically be continued to the February 17th, 2021 NRC meeting. This meeting is being recorded and can be viewed on the Minuteman Media website. If anyone is recording the meeting, I ask you to so inform the commission. At this time, I would ask the commissioners to introduce themselves. Greg?
Greg Higgins.
Nick?
Nick Pappas.
Judy?
Judy Zonbrecker.
And Sarah.
Sarah Grimwood.
Great, thank you guys. Let's move to, I guess, we got 2 sets of meeting minutes to approve. I am going to defer on the December 16th since I was not present that evening and I only listened to one specific case. And I had no comments on the January 6th meeting minutes.
I submitted some 2 minor edits on the January 6th minutes to Karen. One was a typo and the other one was removing a phrase that was redundant.
Thanks, Judy.
I had nothing to say about the December 16th, but on January 6th on page 10 at the bottom, just a minor change. I had said that I thought the Keyes Road site could move up to NMI and that the Keyes Road site could then be ready for residential. I didn't say it was ready. The buildings would be used for that. I assume they'd build new buildings. So I sent in a slight modification to that effect to Karen.
Thanks, Greg. Anybody else?
No further comments. Thanks.
I make a motion to accept the minutes of December 16th, 2020 and January 6th, 2021 as amended.
Second.
Okay, we'll take the vote. Greg?
Sorry, 1 second. No revisions to December 16th, correct?
Correct.
As written. Okay.
Thanks, Delia. We'll take the vote. Greg?
I say aye.
Nick?
Aye.
Judy?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
And I am an aye for the January 6th, 2021 meeting minutes. Delia, director's update.
So just a couple of things. Land manager, we have interviews underway right now for that position, new position, as you know, that is very excited to get that position filled. We had about 30 or 31 applications submitted for that.
Wow.
Doing 10. We had 5 today. We'll have 5 tomorrow, and hope to bring somebody on by early to mid-March. Really some great candidates coming through for that. The White Ponds Forum for the redevelopment of the recreational facilities there at White Ponds. They've had 2 forums for us so far. They'll have a 3rd one. It was scheduled for tomorrow night. That has been postponed to next Tuesday, the 9th, beginning at 6 p.m. So just to let you know that that's out there. You're already aware about the NMI StarMet public comments. That report is on the website and they are seeking public comments. I think the commission has already given them comments at the public hearing that they came to you in early January. And the only other thing was just sort of an interesting thing that what is it? May know. But he has.
You're freezing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
breaking
Yeah.
up on my end too.
Yeah, you
You're
might want to
freezing,
turn
Oh,
off,
Julia.
no.
turn off your video, maybe?
Computers.
Hey, Delia, you were breaking up there for the last minute or so. Do you think it might help to turn off the video? Oh,
Oh, looks like,
looks like we lost her
yeah.
Hmm.
for a moment. Well, let's give her a minute to come back on.
Yeah, she's coming.
Okay,
so
looks like
the
she's
host.
back on again.
She's back
great.
on. She's down here at the bottom on my screen. She's got her mic off.
Yeah, there you
I'm
go.
going
She's
to
on.
try
You're
to
back.
connect on a computer. I don't think I really am. I think that my computer is really not performing well. So
Mm,
I'm gonna try on a
good. Oh,
different computer. You just-
okay. Yeah, let's give you a minute on that.
Want to do the continuance? We'll get that out of the way.
Yeah, good idea, Greg. Thank you.
I make a motion to continue the Lot 2A Cayuga Road, CWB file number 20-1 until February 17th, 2021.
Second,
Thank you, Nick. And the vote, Greg,
I,
Nick,
Aye.
Sarah,
Aye.
and Judy,
aye.
and I am an I as well. Okay,
She's back.
good. Let's see. How you doing, Delia?
you're muted.
There you go.
Okay, so. Yeah, feedback, 1 second.
Yeah, you're going through your computer? Apologize for the delay here.
It's definitely
I'm
worth
trying
it, though.
It's a must. Yeah.
Sorry,
Oh, you sound
can
good.
you hear me?
Yeah,
Good.
sounds very
Okay,
good.
and no reverb?
No reverb.
Nope.
Okay, now I've got to turn you guys up now. Okay, how's that?
That's good.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm not quite sure how this is going to work with sharing. And apparently my internet connection is still unstable. So I'm going to turn my camera off. And I think we can skip the only thing with the Willow Guzzle was that it was a place where cows go to drink. So I just thought that was kind of cool.
That's a good name for it. Delia, that's the end of your report?
That's it.
Okay. All right, so we'll move to the continuances this evening. Road, Middlesex School, DEP file number 137-1545. And I think Steve and Ryan are in the, no, maybe not Ryan. Oh yeah, there's Ryan. And certainly it appears a lot of progress has been made since last meeting. And I believe Delia passed on some of the commentary we have towards that. So perhaps Ryan or Steve, if you could speak to those comments initially, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Again, I'm Steve McCune with the Middlesex School. Tonight with us is Ryan Chmielewski from Weston and Sampson, and Marie Ruderman, who spoke to the group last time. She's a toxicologist with Weston and Sampson. And then we also have tonight a special guest, Sal Canciello from S3 Designs. Sal was the independent third party who helped manage the alternative analysis that you have seen. Sal did not perform the alternative analysis, but should be able to answer a majority of the questions. So that's who is here on behalf of the school tonight.
Great, thank you. Ryan, are you going to walk us through the perhaps the various points on the? No, I guess we have. Yeah.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So there were 4 points. Is that correct? Is it from your recent email today, Delia?
Yeah, I've got 6 points generally on the general commentary. They may overlap, but I think they're all individual comments.
Okay, so the alternatives analysis should include review and cost of deep-rooted grass fields. We have information on that. Steve is working with that third-party engineer to formulate an official response. We could have a bit of discussion on it if you'd like.
I think as far as the alternatives, you guys went to the length of looking at some of the alternate fields, the turf fields, which we appreciate. So it only makes sense to maybe, kind of incorporate that into the alternatives in a typical sense, and also, maybe some more discussion about the maintenance of, the turf field versus the artificial field.
Yeah, in general, I recently did a townwide athletic field master plan, and we referenced the Turry studies on Marblehead, Springfield, and there was a third, and there's a comparison chart of the different costs for maintenance of organically maintained fields, and that was a range. I have it on my end here. Since this is a recorded meeting, I want to get the figures right here. But the organic turf maintenance was anywhere from between $10,000 and $22,000 per field, which was between $5,000 and $11,000 an acre to maintain. In comparison to a Sports Turf Managers Association, a native high school field, the one in their article had a native topsoil field being between 10 and 15K for maintenance, and a sand-based high performance field anywhere from 25 to 42K. And that extra maintenance for a sand-based field comes from the added water needed because of less clay and silt content in the soils, added nutrients necessary for it, fertilization. So it's just a whole increased regimen of maintenance that's required for sand-based fields.
Okay.
Whereas
On that, it does include in the memo, not necessarily in the matrix, but the memo does touch on the grass fields, and if that needs to be further elaborated, I'm sure we can do that with some of the numbers that Ryan has included. But I didn't want to just gloss over the fact that it was not included. It was more in the memo.
Yeah, no, thank you, Steve. I think it was spoken to generally at the front end of I think in Gale Associates memo, but it'd be nice to just treat it as a typical, in the alters analysis like the other aspects of the artificial turf field.
Ed, I had a quick question.
Yeah, Judy.
Yeah, when on sand-based field, is that the same as the deep root fields?
Not really. The deep root field.
Okay.
Yeah, deep root field is really, well, I take that back. A deep root field, like what is the exact definition of that? Are we talking about the deeper root grasses like fescue that had been mentioned before, the turf type fescues?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a trade-off to that, and it's really what your soil medium is below what grass you're growing. Typically, if you you could get a long root system if you have good underlying soils below your athletic root zone mix. And that athletic root zone mix in a native field is generally 6 inches with not so great draining materials below. And a deeper sand-based field, you could go up to 14, 16 inches and potentially get that depth of roots. However, you're also irrigating 14 to 16 inches worth of soil versus the top 6 inches, which hold water a long time. There's also a trade-off too. Deeper root, higher sand has better reliability, but you're putting a lot more down in water and fertilizer. That's a major drawback, especially
Okay.
adjacent to a wetland. Whereas the higher clay and silt, you have less frequent, and native soils, you have less frequent irrigation and fertilization. However, the trade-off is dependability of the field. You're closing fields more frequently and during rain events, and you have a longer wait in the springtime in order to play on them because they don't drain.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Ed, could I just ask a question about that?
Yes.
So in reading what Marblehead has done, they did not experience that situation where they had reduced playability with the deep-rooted fields that they're treating, and they're using them organically so that they're not using pesticides and herbicides, but they're getting really good play out of those fields.
And I think, Delia, it's noted here that they seem to indicate that the annual maintenance is something to the effect of approximately $4,000, if I'm reading that correctly.
I didn't see any numbers though for quantification
Yeah.
of how much those fields are being used. Was that available? It seems to me one of the issues at Middlesex is the amount of playing they want to do and the number of classes that are involved and the intensity that they require in
Yep.
total, however many fields they have.
Yeah, Nick, I'm just looking at the general write-up, if you will.
Mhm.
It indicates both, about that approximate dollar, of course, but it also indicates about 1,360 playing hours in the season, which is, a pretty good.
How does that compare to what Middlesex requires for playing?
I don't know. And again, part of the alternatives is just to analyze that and come back with that, because again, it certainly may not be sufficient for Middlesex, playability and times. So it would just be helpful to include that.
Let me see, reading over what we were given, the one thing that did seem to be missing to me was this issue of that Steve has brought up before, which is how that they have a high usage requirement. They need a lot of 3 different classes. There are a lot of playing events in a year, in this calendar year. And it seemed to me from what the report said that if they can't get enough, if they go to a field type that doesn't allow them enough playing, they would need more fields, which isn't good.
Yeah.
Right. So that dimension of what the usage requirements are at Middlesex is missing so far. And I think it's important for understanding whether or not the natural turfs are appropriate or not.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. Yeah. And again, building that into the alternatives, they'll probably answer those questions through that.
And just to touch on that a little bit more and acknowledging Delia's comment, we will share a communication that Gail had with the town of Springfield, which uses the organic turfs, and frankly, they've mirrored what Ryan has already spoken about, is that those fields do sit unused after a rain event.
Yeah.
Again, we currently have, again, every student at Middlesex is a co-curricular requirement to participate in team sports. In inclement weather, we do cancel our sub-varsity teams. We do not have the facilities to house productive, safe practices or games. The varsity programs do go to our existing 2 turf fields. And then with that too, we also lose the equitability between our programs, whether it's varsity, sub-varsity, but also boys and girls. So again, all together is considered. Our current natural grass fields are a high fescue mix. I think they're about as well maintained as you can get in New England. Our grounds foreman is renowned in New England. So again, it's not like our existing grass fields are not properly managed. The reality is that the existing conditions do not allow to, support our existing program.
Thanks, Steve. And again, I at least what I'm saying is there's no one answer out there. The 4,000, the 1,360 hours, maybe that's their specific experience. And to your point, the other fields that an investigation you have is something different. And again, I don't think it's again, if we could just build that into the alternatives, it'd just clarify some things. That's all. I don't think it's a hard point here about artificial or turf, but I think we need that final analysis.
Yeah, I really think I'm familiar with the 3 studies through Terry as well. And you really have to look and see what type of use is actually being as part of that study. In the majority, there's only 200 hours of field hockey use, and the rest of those 1,200 or whatever hours are baseball use. Baseball has a much different impact on natural grass than a gridiron football, soccer, lacrosse, field hockey. There's much more wear and tear on the fields than baseball or softball.
Yeah.
Additionally, some of the maintenance costs are deferred by volunteerism in Marblehead as well, through like volunteers just physically going out and picking weeds out of the field as well.
Gotcha. Again, all good perspective. That would be helpful just to incorporate.
Yep.
Thank you. Then I think we have. Are you going to speak to let's see. I think there was some discussion about the invasive species management plan as well. Right?
And I had a few other just kind of clarification questions on the grid. If I could ask maybe those before we move on. And these are just to make sure I understand terminology. And some of the cons, it was mentioned must use proven, and I was wondering what that meant.
Can you?
Here, let me just a second here.
A little bit.
I gotta make the type bigger here. Sorry, guys. Let's see, it was down on, wouldn't you know it, I can't find it when I'm looking for it. Okay, if I look down on the extruded plastic pellets, so the thermoplastic elastomer, and on the cons, on the 4th one down, it says generic material must use proven. And I wasn't sure what that meant.
So, and Sal can certainly speak to this. My understanding and the school's understanding is that because of the wide range of products available, you do want to make sure you're using a proven product. There was one example of TP applications. I believe it was in Texas in high heat, where the plastic wasn't one of the proprietary mixes. It sounded like it came from China and it melted in the high heat. So that was one of the cons that I understood.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure I understood what the phrase meant. And also some of the materials indicated that a shock pad was necessary. Could you describe what a shock pad is and what it's made of?
Sure. Steve, do you want to take this one? Or do you want me to?
I mean, again, I've learned a lot in this process. I'm no subject matter expert, but
yeah, we all are.
Yeah, but I've certainly played on a lot of these types of fields growing up, and the shock pad is what lies underneath the infill and really provides that that FIFA impact rating, where I think it's been referenced a lot now for player safety, for concussions. So if somebody were to fall, the shock pads help absorb that impact and then also make it a safer playable surface.
Okay. So it's like a foam pad of some type, or is it?
It's another one of those proprietary, ingredients. The one that we have proposed is a mix of foam and other materials that is again manufactured at the same plant and comes as like a one rollout
Okay, so it's part of the turf that gets rolled out. So it's it's a laminate type of material that you roll out.
Correct.
Yeah,
Okay.
it goes above the stone and below the turf backing, below the carpet.
Okay. All right. And this one was actually on the technical data sheets. I was looking through those. On some of the technical data sheets, when they had analysis, and then it has pass. And I wasn't sure what that pass meant. So if you go down to like the Brockville, natural Brockville, yeah, that one. And if you scroll down just a little bit, it has environmental capacity. I was wondering when it says result, what does pass mean?
Marie, do you want to chime in on this? It looks like.
It-
Yeah, with that. Okay.
This is the first I'm seeing it, so I'm just reading it right now. It means it's within acceptable limits. So pesticide testing, they probably tested it for pesticides, and I'd have to go back to the manufacturer to verify this, but pass probably means it was all non-detect. Chlorinated acid herbicides pass. Typically there's a level that they want to be at or be under, and so each of these individual tests pass.
Okay, so it indicates it's below whatever level is specified. Okay.
Right.
And the one last question, again, this is just a terminology. On the alternatives analysis, and there was information in organic infills. Are those specifically, and there's like coconut husk, et cetera, are those or considered organic because there's no pesticide residues, et cetera, in them? Or are they considered organic because they're made from organic, carbon-based materials?
I would say the latter of the two, organic carbon-based materials. I'm not aware of the test of the chemical testing or like they showed on the Brockville for pesticides and other types of potential contaminants.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. Yeah, I just want to make sure I understood what I was looking at and understood the terms. Thank you.
Okay, and I guess if we should stay on the field, so I guess, Marie, we're going to provide some further clarification on, I know the proposed testing was suggested 3-year plan quarterly and then moving annually years 2 and 3 if everything is,
Right. What I recommended
standard.
was to analyze leachate, so groundwater that's below or next to the turf. For SVOCs, which are semi-volatile organic compounds, which includes PAHs and phthalates. The infill, the carpet doesn't contain them, but the carpet is a plastic. The ecofill is a like a synthetic rubber type material, and that's the type of potential contaminants that typically we look for with plastics and rubbers. So that's why I recommended it. So what I recommended was that we take at least one background sample before the synthetic turf has been installed. And the reason that I suggest doing a background sample is because, PAHs are, they can leach off of asphalt. There's natural amounts of there's natural amounts of PAHs in the environment. So you want to make sure that if you have results afterwards and you do detect some pHs, you kind of have a background as to what might actually be there beforehand.
No, that makes perfect sense to take a baseline.
Right, right. And so then what I suggested was to collect quarterly sampling and analyze for SVOCs. So that's 4 times in a year. And then if nothing is detected or nothing above background, then we collect sample in the spring every year after that for, an extended period of time. I'm not sure how long you want to continue to collect samples. But, once yearly after that in the springtime, and the spring is typically when you have the spring runoff, the higher amounts of rain. And so that's when leaching typically will occur. That's when you'll see the highest concentrations typically. So that's my recommendation.
Okay. Yeah, and correct me, it's my understanding if SVOCs were going to show up, they probably happen in the first year anyway. You'd see those more immediately. So
Right.
it seemed to make sense on the 3-year plan. It seemed to, if everything was good after the year, I don't know how the other commissioners feel, but it seemed to me that the annual would be fine after that. Anybody have any other perspective on that, Judy, or as far as?
No, that makes sense to me, certainly.
Okay. Okay. I just had a few questions on the testing as well. One question, and hopefully it's for the benefit of the school as well. I know you're bringing a lot of fill in to bring up the site. Is there a testing criteria for the bringing in the new fill? Because you certainly don't want to add to a problem if you don't know what the fill is constituted. So is that in the kind of construction program? Just again, it's more of a safeguard for the school when the fill is coming in to make sure it's good quality. It doesn't have any things that we don't want to have in there.
It's not,
Right.
yeah, go ahead, Marie.
It should be clean fill that's brought in. Actually, Ryan or Stephen will know where that fill is coming from, but typically clean fill is tested for like metals, pHs, and a couple of things before it's classified as clean fill.
Okay. And okay. And I know when we excavate on certain projects, we have to analyze every 500 tons and determine where it has to go, unlined landfill, landfill, and so on. So I guess it's the reverse coming in. You'd have that tested on the clean fill criteria. Okay.
Yeah, what I was going to add to that was that we haven't selected a construction management firm, and it typically depends. For example, when we have worked with Cataldo for site work, they bring it from a farm in Groton. And then when we work with French, it comes from another location. So it all depends.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, depending on the source. Yeah, thank you, Steve. Let's see. And I guess just one question on the testing criteria. It would be nice to, I think the literature said that you would be testing the SVOCs to non-detect. I think it would be good to get the actual, instead of just saying non-detect, might be nice to see the numbers on that as against the background. The point being, if, hypothetically benzene was at 100 as background, it's one thing if it's 10 or 15, it's another thing if it starts coming up to 99. And just being able to kind of accurately track that. Is that testing rather than just non-detects?
No, I would want actual testing that tells you what the numbers are and has detection limits and that sort of thing.
Okay, I just couldn't tell from the write-up. Thank you.
Okay.
And I guess the final question I had, and I think this is an issue that Judy had brought up previously on microplastics. And I think Ryan had a pretty good explanation last time about trying to catch that with some filtration at the catch basins now that are in lieu of the trench drain. I think that's the idea.
Yeah, so after further thought about that, we proposed a belt and suspenders, like several points to be able to capture any possible microplastics that may come off the field. Originally, I had said that taking away the trench drain might be a good idea, but after really internalizing it, we left it in place and actually use that as a trapment area for, give a chance for a kid to stomp his cleats or her cleats. And we have proposed like a silt sack in each of the inline catch basins. So it will be virtually impossible for any microplastics to get into the underground from that point. The rest of the field, by the nature of the construction of the field, it cannot get through the backing material of the synthetic turf fibers themselves. And should there be any possible microplastics that get through, we have hooded catch basin outlets right immediately outside of the field. And then we also have proposed the oil grit separator tanks before the outlet discharge in the stone level spreader. So it would take care of any, like we talked about last time, it would take care of any floating material as well as any material that sinks, and have clean out ports, so those could be monitored after certain rain events.
Great.
So I think, yeah, so we left it in there as actually a benefit to capturing the microplastics and not have them migrate any further.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation, kind of coming back around to it. So,
Yeah.
Let's see. And just to, and one last point is I know there's no metals testing here. I understand that Ecofill is very, very low on the metals. Well, I was going to suggest that, as I understand it, metals are very cheap test. It's something like $200 for the suite of Recra metals. Maybe for the first year with the school, consider doing that just as a little bit of belts and suspenders, and it helps build our database on these type of fields. And I don't think it's a great expense. Certainly don't want you to go to extraordinary efforts, but it would be nice to be able to just track that real time in the field versus kind of analytical results out of the lab.
Steve, that's
Yeah, I mean, of course, again, it just comes back to, I know there's data in Concord from similar fields in that testing, and if nothing's going to happen with that data and we're going to continue to test, then happy to.
Yeah, again, I think it just bolsters the data we have. So again, it confirms the ecofill. That's great. And again, it gives us a little more confidence going forward if this was to arise again.
Sure. And I understand that would be something that would come up in the first year of testing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we'd see it there.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
also, if you're going to test for metals, make sure you test a background sample for metals as well, because
Yeah.
metals are always in the background.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep.
I don't think I have any other comments. Any of the commissioners have any comments on the field disposition? Okay. And I think from the commentary that Delia provided, I think, getting close on the invasives, but I think it's got to be better calculated, put on a plan, just a little bit better explanation, and then obviously the native planting list and how that's going to be planted. I think relatively straightforward.
Yes, we plan on getting that done over the next couple of days and submitted by Friday. And I'm actually working with our certified ecological practitioner in our group, in our landscape architecture group. She's well versed in vegetative management, restoration, so she'll digest the Bartlett Tree Expert mitigation plan and make it look like an understandable, readable plan.
Thank you. That'll be great. Anybody else have any other, commissioners have any other questions in regard to the application? And I believe, I believe Concord Public Works had some final comments. I guess there were some additional underground drainage piping added and whatnot. I believe, Delia, you had mentioned that just recently.
Yeah, that was the information that I had shared with Ryan and Steve today. So if you can get us the revised stormwater calcs for engineering to review, that would be great.
And I had one quick question on that because their comments seem to pertain to the baseball infield. And since that was out of the purview of the wetlands, I understand DPW is going to sign off. Is that something that you want for this group, or is that something that we should just have happen as part of the building permit?
This is when they will do their review, so it would be good to have that all squared away now. Yep.
Yeah, I know the stormwater calcs take some time. As soon as I read it, I fired it off to my civil engineer to see availability. It will be forthcoming. It's just a matter of timing.
Yeah, understood. Okay. If we're done with on the commissioner's side, is there any public comment in regard to the application? Sharon? Go ahead, Sharon. Sharon, could you unmute yourself?
Sorry. There we go. Thank you. Sharon McGregor, 70 Williams Road. So question about the publishing of the report. I looked on the website, I saw a couple of different independent documents, but I didn't see a comprehensive alternatives analysis report. Is there a comprehensive document for public review? And if yes, how long would that public review period be open?
Thanks, Sharon. I think we spoke to the alternatives analysis still needs to be tightened up a little bit. I can't speak to the timing of that. That's probably up to Ryan and Steve in that regard.
So there's no comprehensive pieces. I just see a few independent documents on the list. Is that what's been submitted to date, and there's more to come?
Yeah, I believe they were going to build in a little bit better discussion on the turf fields, maintenance on all the products, and again, have a more comprehensive alternatives analysis. That is correct.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the public like to make a comment?
This is Jane here.
Hey, Jane.
Sort of semi-public, semi-select board, board liaison. One thing that occurs to me during this whole process is, given what I think we'd like to see Middlesex look at in reviewing options, it also makes me aware that Middlesex is not alone. We already have other turf fields in town. We have a moratorium in some places, but there are other school areas that could potentially be impacted. And it probably would not be a bad idea for there to be I don't know whether it's the NRC or the Department of Planning and Land Management, to have a factual, a comprehensive report on what's known and what's not known in turf fields, since it falls, regardless of whether there's wetlands involved, it is a space of, it often coincides with the natural landscape in Concord.
Yeah, it does. And this is obviously a significant change to that from what we can see in the plan. So, Delia, any thoughts on where that should land in terms of that analysis? Obviously, Steve and Ryan will provide a pretty good start on that, I would assume, by way of their final alternatives analysis.
Right. So that's a big question, and it's quite broad. It depends on a lot of different things. What we look at from NRC standpoint is the effects on wetlands, and generally what people look at when they're thinking about turf fields is the impacts on human health. Health is also in DPLM. So, Jane, are you talking about commissioning a report that evaluates fields from every feasible standpoint that you would consider whether there's an impact and
I think what I'm imagining is a document that would have input from, as you say, the Department of Public Health, from the NRC, from planning, and probably from the schools, that would be looking at the data that exists, rather than taking a position one way or the other, so that in this case, the NRC isn't in a position of doing the investigation of other options and then asking that those be looked at. And likewise, if there's a field proposed somewhere else, that doesn't fall, that responsibility doesn't fall in another town department, rather that this is a set of data that clearly Ryan's work would go into. I mean, this is a wonderful asset, you know, this is a useful beginning, but we've been around this before, and that's, I think, and it's the lack of common knowledge that certainly gives me pause, and I suspect has allowed other people to wonder about where are we in the evolving state of the art.
Two comments. One is this area, technology, or whatever you want to call it, it's constantly changing. And if you had such a thing, it would be true for the moment, but probably not for very long, because even the natural grass approaches have changed over the years. Second, it just seems to me it must be up to the select board to figure out who would do this, because as you pointed out, Jane, there's no obvious place, or I inferred from what you said, there's no real obvious place for it to be done in the town government right now.
I'm just wondering, given this process, whether this is an indication that something like this, assuming, let's say, as Nick, as you point out, that it might more readily fall to the select board's initiative than to one committee or one department of the town, but actually, you know, perhaps under the town manager's review. My point is simply that, you know, that way Middlesex isn't, you know, in the future, a Middlesex would not be asked to start from scratch or to do, you know, you can run the process both ways, and it doesn't mean that any permit looking, you know, permit seeking project wouldn't have to do their own due diligence, but at least there was a common base of as current as possible knowledge versus let's all get up to speed really fast and hope that we understand.
Yeah. Thank you, Jen. And I think you're right. As noted, I think the alternatives analysis for Middlesex is valuable. It'd be a good start on that. Should the selects or town manager want to push that forward to a broader understanding and education of the artificial turf fields versus turf fields.
Maybe I can just ask, Delia, how long are the records from these meetings kept in a place where they can be referred back to? Because to Nick's point, if the data is changing again and again, I mean, we've got the record of what's been discussed from, you know, where we are today. But the fact that we do have it saved and we've got all the minutes and discussions and documents, I mean, maybe that would be enough.
So minutes are kept forever. They are, okay, by state law, they're never gotten rid of. We try to cull files after, 5 years, typically after a permit has expired. But something like this, we would always keep. I mean, we've kept all the FEN reports, even though we're not required to by law, because they are valuable information. So, so the data does exist, and we have a database that says, who has constructed a turf field. If it's a little bit more cumbersome than I think what Jane is proposing, but the data is there, and so that's a good point.
Great. Any further comments from the public?
We have Mark Miles' hand up.
Okay, Mark.
Hi there. I have a question, really a detail kind of question for the Middlesex folks, but it does pertain to the requirements of the field that would be a part of the alternatives assessment. And that is, you've mentioned, Stephen, I believe it was you, both this evening and in previous meetings, that your curriculum program requires that students participate in sports as a graduation requirement at Middlesex. Do I have that right, Stephen?
Our athletics program is part of our co-curriculum program. It's not necessarily a graduate requirement, but it's if you're going to come to Middlesex School, you as a freshman and as a sophomore, you will participate in 3 seasons of team sports, and that starts to dwindle down as you continue on as a student at Middlesex.
Okay, so my question then is, prior to the advent of synthetic turf fields, did that requirement also exist at that time at Middlesex? And if so, how did the school make it possible for students to satisfy that requirement?
I see where you're going with this question, and well, I appreciate the thought. It's one of those things where the school has grown over the years. The student body has grown just in the last 10 years. This year's class is as large as it's ever been. We're at 400 and I believe it's 14 students. So, you multiply that by 3 for just talk about athletes who are participating in sports. And that's as large as it's ever been. And we've tried to grow our field programs and our facilities as our student body has grown. So, I mean, the times have changed even since the last time we were in front of this board permitting a turf field on campus, and those fields have worked really well for us. They've been, low maintenance for us, and we even come to this committee to permit other grass fields to help further, support our athletic program on campus. We're at a point where we have no more space to be able to permit grass fields, so we're here for turf field.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else in the public? Okay, I'm not. Delia, you seeing anybody? I don't. Steve, would you like to, given the public works issue on the stormwater calcs, would you like to continue out to the first meeting in March?
Yeah, I think as of today, I think we probably, unless Ryan, you've heard from them, the rest seems easy to be able to submit by Friday. That's the one lingering thing. So
exactly. He's working on it right now. Ryan, any thought on timing from your end? I think you're
muted.
There we go. Sorry, my mouse goes into sleep mode and it didn't want to wake up. Time. Highly likely, yes, we'll need to. I haven't heard back from James Pearson, so I'll follow up with him again. But before we just say yes, I'd like to just confirm that it's.
Yeah, I mean, we can keep you on for the, Ryan, we can keep you on for the next meeting, and if you don't make it, it'll continue to the first meeting in March.
Yeah, I love receiving the emails from Karen anyway, giving me the reminder I need to send in the request.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you all. Good progress. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Ryan.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Mary. All right, next hearing up, notice of intent, 160 Range Road, DEP file number 137-1551. If I'm not mistaken, we're just down to just a couple of issues, I believe.
Yes, that's correct. Molly Obendorf with Stamsky McNary. I'm representing the applicant Alex DeFreitas and the homeowner Chris Winkleman. The project location is at 160 Range Road. And we last met with the commission a couple weeks ago, discussed some revisions and comments requested by staff and commission members. And I will briefly go through those. And that's what you see on the revised plan here. So we have provided, as requested, we've provided a species planting list by zone, number of plants per zone, type of plant. And the trees that are being removed each have a designated symbol, which indicates whether the stump will be ground, flush cut to the ground, or completely removed, or if the stump will remain. And those are included in the legend as well. And a note has been added. This is kind of no longer valid, but a note has been added to the plan that specifies the soil preparation techniques to use prior to the application of the seed mix. And I'll get into that a little bit later. And the existing and proposed tree line are depicted on the plan. A note has also been added to specify that the homeowner remove any debris within the wetland on site, including but not limited to that fencing that was discarded in the wetland. Additionally, pheno markers have been depicted on the plan. They're at the edge of the mitigation areas and specify no mowing beyond this point. And to get into the last remaining issues, so we did, after submitting this plan, we did receive an additional email from staff with some additional comments, most of which were straightforward, closing out some existing permits that are still on the property. So Colleen has provided some information about that, and that could be a condition for the order to close that out, like she said, within 6 months of the issuance of the permit. Provide the patio material. We'll just note that on the plan. It will be concrete. So that will be on the revised plan. There was some confusion about the pheno markers. I don't know if this has to do with potentially where I showed the proposed tree line, but the pheno markers will depict the edge of lawn, and they will read no mowing beyond this point. So anything beyond the pheno markers will be allowed to naturalize and revegetate. So I don't know if any clarification needs to be added on the plan for that. And then the two remaining issues. So we had on the last revision, we provided some pictures of the existing vegetation in the area of the work as well as the mitigation areas. And there's really no understory for the vegetation. It's mostly just trees and tree debris. So we felt that keeping the conservation seed mix was sufficient, but upon further review from staff and the commission, they feel that, you know, shrubs would be a more sufficient mitigation method. So I spoke to the homeowner and he is amendable to that. So 54 shrubs, I believe, was the number, will be provided in those mitigation areas and included on the plant list, broken down by zone. And then the last remaining issue was, so I think there was some confusion about the number of trees being removed in the buffer zone. There are 12 trees total being removed in the buffer zone, 2 of which are dead trees. And it was asked of us that we leave 2 of the trees as dead snags. And so I spoke again with the homeowner, and again, he is amendable to this and has decided to designate, there's the 8-inch, what's that? Let's see. Is an 8-inch maple, I believe. Yeah, 8-inch maple right down there by the siltation barrier. That will be left as a dead snag. Also, the 10-inch dead tree that is also a little bit up gradient from the siltation barrier. Yep, that one right there. That will also be designated as a dead snag. Now, our assumption from what we interpreted from staff comments and emails is, and correct me if we're wrong, but our understanding was that leaving these dead snags eliminated the need to replace these trees. So our replacement of 10 trees is still valid. If we need any clarification on that, great. But that was our understanding of the situation. If we left those 2 trees as dead snags, we only need to replace the remaining 10 trees that were being removed. So we're still proposing the 10 trees along the southern property line. And that pretty much sums up the comments and revisions, but I would like to discuss with the commission the possibility of closing this tonight contingent on receiving a revised plan showing those shrubs, showing the patio material, and then any other remaining comments. We've been at this for a little while, and we would like to close it out. And I think we're good to, submit the plan with the revisions. And we would also like to ask the commission for some shrub recommendations for this area. We're not working with any landscape architects or anything, landscapers. So any input on that would be greatly appreciated.
I'm not sure we can close it out today. I don't think we have, an order prepared on this. Delia, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think you're muted.
Sorry, once the hearing is closed. Are you hearing that feedback or is that just me?
I'm hearing it.
I'm not hearing it.
Oh.
We can't close the hearing until plans have been submitted. Once the hearing is closed, nothing else can come in.
But it sounds like obviously if Molly can get it in tomorrow, it should be fairly pro forma for the following meeting. She doesn't have to show up, assuming everything gets in. So, okay. And Delia, are you okay with that? I'm not clear on the 2 snags from typical precedent. Is that correct? The snags will count as 2 trees?
No, but I think with what remaining mitigation has been proposed, that's sufficient.
Great. Thank you for that. Do the commissioners have any comment on this?
I had a question. When I looked at the pictures, I noticed there was a chicken coop in the back. Did I see that?
Yes, that's correct. This is
that
the home.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, Christopher.
I said yes. That is a chicken.
Okay, and so that's going to stay. That's not getting moved, is it?
It will be moved, actually.
Okay, because I didn't notice it. I guess it must not be in the jurisdiction area because I didn't see it on the plans.
It is not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Does the public have any comment on this application? Okay. Great, Molly. So if you can get that into Delia and staff tomorrow, seems like it should go fairly smoothly at the next meeting and issue that order.
Great. And Delia, would you be okay with me reaching out to you for some shrub recommendations for the mitigation areas?
We actually can't give you recommendations on plantings just because we're not familiar with each of the sites that come in front of the commission.
Okay. Do you have a good resource that we could?
So you should be working with somebody who can give you that kind of guidance. You can also go to New England Wildflower Society. I mean, for shrub plantings, you have to make sure that it's going to work with the conditions of the site. So soils, sun, those sorts of conditions. So you can put in a quick call to Dave Crossman, who should be able to give you guidance if he's been out to the site, or whoever flags the wetlands. But we're not able to recommend plantings.
Okay, understood.
Okay, we'll continue this. Thank you, Molly.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Molly.
Okay. The next Hearing up, 296 Bedford Street, DEP file number 1371553. Seems like that it was all put in pretty good shape. If you could just touch on the issues that you added to the plan to kind of complete it, that would be great.
Sure. Hey, everybody. So the comments from Colleen were to provide a waiver request, which we did, include a planting list, including the species common Latin name for the sedge plantings. So that's the third page in this document, I believe, Delia. And we changed the plantings from sedge to a little blue stem. It's just a native grass along the edge of the construction. Item 3 was to reconcile both site plans. So this overall site plan and the more detailed plans to include the gas and electric line. And that's shown in the red. If you zoom way in, it's very, very small, feet, but yep, it's right there. So that's included. Number 5, I'm skipping 4 for a second. Number 5 is to show an erosion control detail on the plan, and that's shown in the upper right of this plan. It's just the square rolls or straw wattle rolls for a 9-inch diameter roll there, staked in either 4 feet on center, through the middle of it, or on the edges, however the contractor wants to proceed, but securely nonetheless. And then item 4, which I skipped, is to provide a cut sheet of the proposed lighting. And I included an installation detail of the 2 different light types. There's one at the bottom left is the pool light, and that's inside the pool. It obviously can't be metal, and it's non-conductive, very sort of a specialized installation. And then the second light are the step lights. So if you scroll up all the way, Delia, to the plan sheet, and I did include cut sheets, didn't I? I'm pretty sure. So
yeah, I think this detail is adequate. Yeah.
Yeah. So then the step light is frosted step light, which is shown at the upper left of the screen. That's a BK lighting brick star. It's very small. It's only, can't read it on there, about 5 inches wide at the outside, but the light itself is kind of 1 inch by 1 inch square. I got further follow-up from Colleen on the comment about it being dark sky friendly and low pressure sodium. Typically these tiny lights you can't get them in low pressure sodium. The goal is that they're amber color, so they're not at the wavelength to affect wildlife. And we went with this particular light because it is amber. You can get it in an amber color. Mm-hmm. Without the need for filters or anything. So it's a native LED amber color. And so the goal is to have some light for safety. It's turned off whenever it's not in use, and the owner doesn't need it for decorative lighting or anything like that. It's just for safety.
Sure.
So the amber wavelength is fine.
I mean, it's a step light that's literally, what, 3 or 4 inches off the ground, and it seems to be completely shielded. So it seems like it's a good choice.
Yeah.
I don't have any further comments. Does any of the commission?
No.
No. Any comments from the public? Okay, hearing none. I think we have a motion on this. Judy, you want to take that on?
Yeah, I was just pulling it up here, so make sure I get the right one. I move to close the hearing and issue an order of condition for, let me get the address, for 296 Bedford Street, Concord, Massachusetts, DEP file 1371553 with findings A, B, C, and D. Standard conditions 1 through 19 and special conditions 20 through 52.
Greg seconded. We'll take vote. Judy?
Aye.
Thank you. Sarah?
Aye.
Nick?
Aye.
Greg? And I'm aye as well. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, we have 2 close and issue decision. Delia, you want to just give us a quick background on these?
Sure. So for Austin, that was a project that was before the commission a few meetings ago. It was a garage demolition and rebuilds. They did receive historic approval. They're going to ZBA next Thursday, and ZBA wants everybody to have approved all the projects before it comes to them. So there were no changes that were suggested at the commission's last meeting. So this looks like it's good to go.
Okay. And if we want to do these together on the Babcock?
There were very minor revisions to that addition at 144 Upland Road. Those have been made to the plans, and that's all set to go as well.
Great. Could I have a motion on these 2?
I make a motion to close and issue the following 2 hearings. The first is for 26 Elm Street, DEP file 1371549, and issue an order of conditions which has findings A, B, C, and D, standard conditions 1 through 19, and special conditions 20 through 48. And to close and issue order conditions for 144 Upland Road, DEP file 1371552, with findings A, B, C, and D, standard conditions 1 through 19, special conditions 20 through 49.
Great. Do you have a second?
I only see findings A, B, and C in the copies I have.
I'm sorry, I meant to say A, B, C, A, B, and C. I got kind of going on a roll there and then stop.
Yeah, for both.
Sorry.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate the catch. Do you have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Nick. And the vote, Nick?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Judy?
Aye.
Greg?
Aye.
And I am a yes as well. Great. Moving on, certificate of compliance. Delia, anything on this?
All set to go.
Okay.
Make a motion to issue a certificate of compliance for DEP file number 137123888 Southfield Road.
Second? Do we have a second?
Second.
Great. Judy?
Aye.
Nick?
Aye.
Greg?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well. Great. So now we have some other business. I think 2 discussion points, one on the 50-foot and one on neonics. Delia, do you want to frame this conversation?
I would be happy to. So there was, let's see, there's a little bit of ambiguity, I think, in the policy. And Nick had highlighted the paragraph in the policy. And as we get into this discussion, I'm going to download it on this computer. It's on my other one right now. But it basically, there's 3 points that I think are worth discussing with the commission. And the first and probably most important one is to understand what an existing encroachment means. So the policy states that, basically the 50-foot is a no-build zone. However, there are times that it is understood that you may need to go into that because your existing house is already there and you want an addition or something like that. So when this policy was revised 2 years ago, it was specifically stated that the you could not increase your existing encroachment. So if you were at 45 feet from wetlands, you could continue to be 45 feet from wetlands with your addition. The question is, and it says from the existing structure. So Nick broke this into 3 talking points, which I think are very helpful. And I'm going to go to the second one first, because I think that's the more critical piece of this. And it says the current policy makes no distinction as to the type of existing structure that might qualify a project for additional incursion. So, the question is whether an existing qualifying structure is it the house? Is it the house and the patio and the deck? Is it just the livable space? Does the garage count as part of the house if that happens to be closer, or is that a separate structure? If you have a retaining wall that's not connected to anything, is that your closest structure? So that's the first question that I think is worth chewing on. Nick also raised the question that there's no upper limit on the area that can be added to an existing incursion. So if you have 100 feet within the 50-foot no-build zone today, does that mean that you're allowed to have 1,500 square feet tomorrow with appropriate alternatives, analysis, and mitigation? And then the third point is, we don't clarify, we don't specify within the policy. We say that if you do get approval to go within the 50-foot no-build zone, you have to do mitigation at a 10-to-1, which is within the 100-foot buffer zone. But really, the way that it's implemented is that it's within the 50-foot no-build, as it should be, and that should be clarified. But then if you're in the 25, if you're doing mitigation in the 25, is it better to say, okay, if you're going to do something that's closer to the resource area and more valuable because it's more beneficial to the resource area, do you get to have a benefit for doing that? So does your mitigation ratio go down from 10-to-1 in the 50 to doing a 5-to-1 in the 25-foot? And that I think that gets a little complicated, because then part of it's in the 25 and that's certain percentage and square footage, and then some of it's in the 50. So it may get a little more complicated than we want to jump into. But this may be more than one meeting's worth of discussion. I think the first point is probably the one that is the most critical, that we need to really sort of sink our teeth into it, this moment right now.
Yeah, and you raise good points, whether the garage is attached to the house or unattached to the house, and how is that perceived in terms of habitable and so on. So,
Well,
Greg?
I think one of the problems we have is that we call it a no build zone, and then we use the word structure, and we use word structure to mean as small an item as an irrigation head.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to figure out our terminology, so we define what structures, or should we use the word building when we talk about the closest building, and then we can subgroup what is defined as a building. But clearly a stone wall or irrigation head clearly is not a building. So to me, looking at this, when I was focusing on it, I said, I think we just simply have a terms problem here, where it's not a no structure zone, it's a no build zone.
Well, it does say or impervious surface.
Right. So you could go down and say my driveway runs next to the pond, within 10 feet of the pond, therefore I can put a house within 10 feet of the pond because I'm no closer than the driveway.
I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't think that's anywhere near close to what we meant. I do believe when we were talking, and it had to do with Barrett's Mill Road, we went Delia, I think it was just you and I on that would be testimony. But we went back and forth with these people that were incredibly patient and they were really nice about it.
Mhm.
They sort of had a U-shaped house and they wanted to infill the U. They wanted to extend beyond the U. And we finally agreed to allow them to extend to the closest point of the house. We didn't look out in the field to find out if there was a structure out there that would get them closer. So I think we should be fairly pinpointed as to how we define what structure qualifies for its proximity to the wetlands. That's all. That's my point
Yeah.
after using
I
all
had
those
the
words
same-
to say that.
Yeah, I had the same reaction you had, Greg, in terms of, and I'm thinking back to the discussions we had on setting this policy up. Our intent was the structure, the livable structure that
That's what I
people
thought.
The
live,
house.
not a wall that's 10 feet or a driveway that's.
That's right.
5
Judy,
feet.
you were on that too. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were. So I just think we have to somehow, for that particular part of the item, just define the starting point that sets that distance, define that starting point, and potentially we should dovetail in, a structure for this purpose means a building that is, primary function of the dwelling, or I don't know.
Yeah, habitable space, right? That's
But a
Yeah,
garage,
a
but I would
garage
have
would
thought
probably qualify.
a garage should qualify. But do you remember if you put this together originally, do you remember your thinking of what you meant by an impervious surface though? Rather than a house?
It meant everything. I mean, so.
Okay.
Whatever water won't run through.
right.
And even, I mean, with
Right,
it,
okay.
with something like a sprinkler head, the idea of that was slightly different because it was, if you're 50 feet away from wetlands, you're pretty close. You shouldn't need to be doing, constant irrigation. So that was a little bit different.
What about parking areas? We're talking impervious. What about a parking area? I'm already in. Can I make my parking area a little bit bigger?
If it's impervious?
Yeah.
And let's say you're 18 feet from the wetlands, I think our policy would say no.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, if you made it pervious, I don't know what happens, but impervious, it would be.
What if it was just gravel or something?
Yeah.
Gravel is essentially impervious.
Yeah.
After 5 years, it's impervious.
It gets beaten
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember, haven't we had a few hearings where it has been a detached garage that
Sure.
has been within the 50, but I can't remember if we've had any situations where they wanted to expand the footprint within the 50 for that detached garage, but no closer to the current wetlands. Delia, do you happen to remember? I know we've had some detached garages that have been within the 50.
So we have the one at, we have the one at 43 Old Bedford right now. That is a proposal for a new, it's actually not detached. It is attached to the house. So that's not what you're looking for. I'm not thinking of any off the top of my head.
Okay.
Detached garages.
Yeah, I guess all of those have been they've been moving them back from the wetlands.
Right.
Okay.
Could we say something about, a structure is a certain height? Or mind you, a fence post can be quite high, so that wouldn't work.
I mean, for the purposes of, we sort of made a compromise, just going back to the discussion of how this got to allowing this, was clearly it had to do with the dwelling, not any other structure / building. It wasn't like a shed that's 20 feet away. You can push your house within, no. I would say I think Judy would back me up on this. The discussion was clearly to allow somebody to fill in no closer than the existing dwelling. And
right.
Now, I don't know whether a detached garage, I don't think we went there in our thinking, but clearly fence posts, all those such things were not part of them.
Right. And we did use this policy within the last 3 or 4 months. Where was the home
I was with Lee Cott, I think was the architect.
Yes,
there.
that was
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
right.
we've done
Yep.
that multiple times.
Yeah.
And one of the cases I know that's been continued, I mean, they've got a shed in the 50, their garages, or I think it's in the 25, their garages, there's another, I think that structure's out of the 50, but I'd hate to have sheds and, you know, detached garages drive that ability to build closer.
Right.
It seems like it ought to be the main residence. And if there's an attached garage, maybe that links up because it's, you know,
Attached.
with the house.
It's attached, right?
Yeah.
Let's see, just a clarification. Ed, you said main residence, but some of the recent zoning changes allow multiple buildings, so it would be any habitable
Any.
structure.
Yeah, good point, Nick. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it would be the dwelling.
Mhm.
Do you think it would also include any associated structures attached to the dwelling, such as a patio or deck?
Well, the deck would be part of the dwelling. I don't know what a patio would be.
Okay.
I don't know. What do you?
I'd like to
I
think
don't, I
on
don't
that.
know.
Yeah.
There are going to be tweaks to this. I mean, you can see somebody coming in and wanted expanding their garage because it was a small garage. And they wanted to and they want to make it further away from the wetlands. You know, they're at 46 feet and they want to go the 4 feet plus back into the 55, 60. If they're going further away, is that okay? You know,
I think
don't
so.
know. You get all these things coming up. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. Well, all the more reason to revisit it. So,
Yeah.
okay. On the
But
other,
it certainly wouldn't be defined, Ed, as a structure as defined of how we define heads and all. I think we've got to get it into the dwelling, some kind of an accessory buildings to directly attach to the dwelling or some. I don't know,
yeah,
something like
I think we have to define our terminology to Nick's point.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, so why don't I make some tweaks to that language that you can take a look at?
That would be great.
Okay.
We like tweaks.
Tweaks are always good when they're
Yep.
when they're needed.
Yes. And we live and learn, right?
Exactly.
Yep. On the other
Um,
2 points, any particular thought from the commissioners on that?
I was wondering, maybe this is not appropriate, but I was thinking of, you know, when we have products in the riverfront, that's already built within, what is it, the 100-foot, Delia? That there are standards in terms of how much can be within that region.
Mhm.
Could we take a similar type of approach for within the 50 of no more than, you know, 10% of what is already there? I don't know
Yeah.
what the right number is, but I was thinking it could be analogous to that type of situation.
And Judy, you're speaking to the upper limits that could be allowed
Yeah.
by way of a secondary incursion into the 50.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Or new.
And set it up so that it's always based back to the original incursion,
Yeah, like
not
a
back
dou-
to where you are currently. Because
like
otherwise you can
double or
start,
some multiple
Mm.
perhaps, like double or triple or whatever.
yeah,
That might be something that people over in planning could help us with a little bit, because they do language around zoning things, and we don't want to just,
Mhm.
you know, invent the wheel if they had a way of handling that. I
Right.
think you're right, Judy. You need some language about that.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, because also if you're saying back to the original, you know, that could have been the extension could have still been there a very long time.
mhm,
Do you see what I mean?
yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Look at Millbrook Terry. So that's, you know, right across from my office.
hmm
And the buildings and the parking lot, those are all within, you know, not all of them, but, you know, the Rite Aid and the new building is within 50 feet because the pavement was within 50 feet.
Mhm.
So, you know, in a situation like that, I think I would be careful with allowing a certain percentage above what's already existing. Nick,
okay,
if you had, you know, something like Millbrook Terry, if you had that and you said, you know, you could still have up to 20% more or something like that. I think that's I think it's better to tie it to the riverfront because that basically says you get up to a certain square footage or a certain percentage. And if you've already exceeded that, you can keep your exceedance, that's grandfathered, but you don't get to go anymore.
So to interpret that, what you're saying is that you might have something that said you can have, I'm making a number up, okay? You can have 1,500 square feet in that area. If you have 500, you could add 1,000. But if you had 15, end of story, no additions.
And if you had 37, you still get 37.
37.
100.
Oh, 100, yeah. I
yeah.
was gonna say
Sorry.
37.
Yeah, you're cut off.
Okay. Interesting.
So let me talk to Elizabeth about that. Hughes, and see if she has any zoning planning language. And I'll look at the Wetlands Protection Act and see if I can come up with something on that as well.
And any thoughts on the 10 to 1 or 5 to 1, or you want to think about that and discuss it further, or?
Well, in thinking about that, the mitigation, 10 to 1, you might say you go to a certain point and anything in excess of that, and you could think about it that you had to have a 40 to 1 or 50 to 1, meaning you better have a huge piece of land to go above that. I don't know whether that works, but I'm just thinking out loud, that's all. You know what I mean?
Not exactly.
I'm not following that as to the mitigation.
Well, I think the point Greg is making is that not taking into account what we just said about placing new limit a new way.
Right.
Existing policy would allow you to increase very much. And the only thing that bounded how much you could increase was how much available mitigation area you have.
Correct.
Right. But we've kind of taken that away, or a large part of that, by what we just decided about having some overall limit to what you can do.
And I think that's good. I don't think you want to say that if you're a wealthy landowner that has 50 acres versus somebody who has a half-acre lot, that you suddenly get a greater ability to mitigate.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. That seemed rather discriminatory.
Yeah.
But if somebody, just to be a jerk on that point, if somebody had 100,000 acres and they wanted to exceed it by 100 feet and were willing to take all the invasives out of 9,000 acres, a pretty compelling argument to be allowed to expand. So, I mean, there's another side. I get the point, but just to be a jerk.
But there is a community, in that case, you start having a community interest, right? In allowing something.
That's true.
Yeah.
Right.
So we would always encourage that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you don't get to, it's not a by right.
Right.
Okay, let me see if I can draft up some language. It probably will be for the March 1st meeting, not the next meeting, but I'll get it to you as soon as I can.
Thank you. That's great, Delia. And I guess the last subject is the neonics.
Yes, so let's see, as everybody recalls, last year, there was an article on the warrant, Article 49, that prohibited the town from entering into any new agreements that use neonicotinoid products. You are all aware that we have a number of licensing agreements with local farmers in town, many of whom are conventional farmers and use neonicotinoid treated seed. So any new agreements would have prevented that. Any new agreements would have been prohibited from having farmers use those if that article had passed. The article was tabled because of COVID last year. I don't know what the status of it is this year. Sarah, who was former chair of the Pollinator Health Advisory Committee, had reached out to ask a current member what the status is, and we don't know what that is at this point. But in any event, we have a couple of parcels of land that are up for an agreement. One of them is the White Pond fields, which have been historically farmed by Steve Verrill for decades, and prior to that had been part of the Wheeler farm, Wheeler Historical Farm. And Steve Verrill does use neonicotinoid treated seeds. So I had asked the town manager, where do we stand with this? Because we didn't enter into an agreement with him last year. Because of the article, we wanted to wait and see what was going to happen with that. And then this year, the town manager just requested that the NRC or some board come up with a determination on whether this is makes sense or not. I shared with you the information about what Brian Kramer had submitted when I asked farmers last year, right before COVID hit, on whether or not you use them, what alternatives would you use, and these sorts of questions. And Brian Kramer is the organic grower for Hutchins and doesn't have any dog in the fight, and was quite cautious about having, or reluctant to have the town implement such a ban. And I would support that reluctance because I don't know.
Oh, he's reluctant. May I comment, Delia? So
yes,
Brian, as he said, is reluctant for a total ban, but he supported the article that we brought forward. So the article is not for a total ban. The article was to prevent, and if somebody already had an agreement, a license on the land, then it wouldn't affect them. The article was to avoid, completely avoid expanding the amount of land we had neonics being used on. And Brian was, as he says in his note that you gave us, he supported that because he recognized that we really, needed to have the discussion and put people on notice. So
right.
he did certainly approve the article as a kind of compromise, if you like.
Right. I think he lobbied to have that language in there to be new agreements, but I don't think he was necessarily supportive of the article. But I don't want to get into sort of what his sort of opinion on it was. I'll just give my own opinion on it.
Right. Well, he voted to go forward. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. As part of the Agriculture Committee?
No, as part of the Pollinator Committee.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, I missed that. I think from staff's perspective, and we deal with both conventional and organic growers, I have had a number of conversations with the conventional farmers that they are aware, and they've spoken with their suppliers, that this is a concern. The neonicotinoids are a concern, not just in Concord, but this is something that has been raised in other communities as well. So I think they are trying to look at what other things are out there. But the reason that they move to neonicotinoids in the first place is because it means that they don't have to spray. And it's, from their perspective, it's more from a human health concern than it is for pollinators. I think now they're aware of the pollinator issue. And obviously as farmers, they're concerned about pollinators because their crops rely on that. My big concern has always been, if you ban something, what is going to be used in its place? And I don't feel like anybody has got that answer. So I think it's unwise to be banning something until we have a better solution, a known solution. And I don't think it's necessarily assuming that anybody who is banned from using neonics is then going to turn and do organic growing, because the Well, I see Stephen is on the call and he can speak more to that if he chooses to do so. But anyway, so that was one piece of that conversation was just on whether or not neonics should be banned from new agreements. That I'm sure the commission will have lots to
Nick?
talk about on that.
Yeah,
I certainly have a bit more to say, but
I think
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I'm support what you said, Delia, and I find it disappointing that you see things like that paper you sent around. It was a 2-pager. I don't remember where it came from, but you know, nobody's offering any alternatives. No one's saying, well, if you do this, it's, you know, it's another path. I'm not seeing any even-handed analysis being done by anyone. I can find things from the Xerces Society that will tell me neonics are bad. But again, they're not providing any alternative. Their alternative is total integrated non-chemical interventions, which sound wonderful. And I applied them myself, but I'm only a backyard gardener or a front yard gardener. That's all I am. I'm not trying to make a living on this. So if we want this to move forward, I don't know how we get it to move forward without someone providing us information, because we aren't getting any information about the alternatives.
Does the UMass Extension Service provide any information on alternatives? No.
The alternatives are not good. I mean, I have to say that. I mean, having looked into this a lot, and Steve and I have discussed this at length, with the Pollinator Committee. If you're not an organic farmer, then the alternatives really are not good. And actually, for corn, since I don't know, more than 95% of corn in the US is now grown in this way, it would be really hard to change. So I guess that was why this article was written the way it was. It was recognizing it's not to try and turn farmers all into organic farmers. It's recognizing that there is definitely a lot of evidence out there that the problem with neonics, they definitely help from the health point of view, from the people, using the seed and everything, but they do get into the soil and they stick around for sometimes years. And so if you're refarming again and again with neonics, you get this buildup in the soil that then ends up in the water. So for me, especially next to White Pond, and it's one of the reasons I became interested in the NRC, because I was reading about all this kind of runoff into the waterways. And there's definitely data out there showing that that's affect the aquatics and songbirds and such like. So there's definitely lots of different sides to this. And my personal stance is not to try and ban neonics. It's to keep control on the amount of fields we have in Concord where we allow the use of it. So that's why if you already have land where you're growing corn with neonics, then it's not going to change that. You can continue to renew your lease and do that. But it was about not in the end having every single field in Concord being used with neonics, because that could lead to a real detriment to the rest of our land and waterways.
The one question I would have is if we implement this now, if we implement this and like 90% of the corn or even more is grown from seed with neonic, does that push then the use of those regular farmers into other towns with fewer resources? And I'm concerned about the environmental justice of this relative to other people who don't have the resources we have in Concord. I'm a little concerned about that.
Well, and speaking to Nick's issue, what's going, okay, so we don't use those. What are they going to use? And what's the ramifications of that? And are we being asked to submit an advisory opinion, or are we being asked, I have a problem if Stephen wants the NRC to supersede town meeting.
Yes, I have a
That
problem with
I
that.
have a real problem with that. This
Yeah.
has been raised to the point of town warrant article. And I don't think it's our position. It's certainly our position to issue our opinion on something, but to pretend like, oh, it didn't get, for whatever reason, brought up at town meeting, ergo, the natural resources went out of their way to implement that. I have a real problem with that. But one thing we could probably get an agreement on this evening, and that is that if we're leasing town lands, we could agree that a organic farmer takes precedent over any other farmer in terms of bidding on a site, such that that would give people a little bit of impetus, no matter what chemicals you're using.
It drives the cost of locally produced foods up. And it will drive up the cost of locally produced foods, which disadvantages people who don't have as much money.
Could I get a word in?
Sure, Steve.
Could we stop you, Steve?
I hate to admit this, but I haven't learned how to raise my hand without my picture up. What's the trick to doing that? This brings back memories of the old days when I sat in your seats a few years back. But this neonic business is very complicated. It's not resolved and probably won't be for a while. But a lot of the research and cases that are documented go back to things that happened a number of years ago. And the whole technology has changed immensely in the last 8 or 10 years. I remember when we used to get seed treatment in 1 quart cans, like a 1 quart paint can. And we have a scoop that was a couple tablespoons, and you'd scoop the powder out and drop it in the top of a seed hopper. And in those days, we used non-vacuum seeders. The seed just dropped down, and there was a seed plate in the bottom that rotated with holes and let the seeds drop down. And that was fine. It probably worked all right. But then they came out with vacuum seeders, which are great. They're a very precise seeder. And they have a disc that goes vertically with a vacuum on one side and the seed on the other side. The vacuum draws the seed into the hole, and the hole's big enough or small enough so the seed won't go through it, but it just stops at the hole. And then when the disc rotates around almost 360 degrees, the vacuum's released and the seed drops in the ground. Well, what also happens there, if you have powder on the seed, that all gets sucked by the vacuum cleaner and blown right out the exhaust into the field. But those days are long gone. Now the seed treatment is all minute amounts put on like a lacquer on the seed. There's no shedding. You can pick up the seed and run it through your hands and nothing comes off. And before, the powder was just separate and blown out into the air. Probably about 20 times or more as much as you needed to treat the seed. So that's been a huge change. And the amounts are microscopic that they used supposed to be enough on the seed to protect the seed from pests while it's germinating and protect the cotyledons for the first couple leaves. And that's about the life of the material that's put on the seed these days. But I guess that's just an update of the way things work now.
So I've always had a question on whether or not the neonicotinoid product from neonic treated seeds ever gets into the pollen, which is the real question, whether it affects pollinators.
There's data showing it. There's data showing it's in pretty much every beehive now.
I
Where's
don't
it
think
coming
there's
from?
much, I don't think there's much evidence to show that they do now. I know a number of years ago, when the woolly was around in the hemlock trees, there was a big fad to treat the hemlock trees. And I actually went down to Ace and bought treatment myself. We had a row of 8 or 10 hemlock trees behind the house. I bought a package and cost quite a lot of money. When I got it home, I discovered it was only enough to treat one tree. So I treated that tree and didn't go back to buy more because I didn't want to spend the money. And today that's the only tree that we have left. So if you see a lot of hemlock trees around, there's a good likelihood they were all treated with enough to treat probably 100 acres of seed or more. It's different proportions.
So Delia, to your question specifically, there was actually a research study done by Harvard in 2016, which showed that nearly 3/4 of all pollen and honey tested from across Massachusetts contained at least one detectable neonicotinoid.
But did that come from corn crops or from hemlock trees?
Well, I don't know, and I do take the point, and this, it makes it more troubling. As you said, Steve, the practices before were a lot worse, and there was probably a lot more neonicotinoids thrown around than there is now, and they get into the soil and they stay in the soil, and then they are taken up by other plants. So, for example, if a lot of farmers put pollinator plants at the side of their field to try and mitigate the fact that they're using neonics on the field. But if the neonics are traveling into the soil and through the water, they then are taken up by those wildflowers, which attract the pollinators, which then can, be impacted by them.
I think
I like to think things are getting better and the levels aren't quite so high. From what we're just talking about in the way that practices have improved, but the fact is that neonics are taken up into other plants and they do get into the system. So
well,
that's
I think if you let me interrupt a minute, I think there's a big difference. When you treat a hemlock tree, you spread it on the surface of the ground all around the tree for a big area.
Mm-hmm.
And that is enough to saturate the soil to the point the roots of the tree pick up the neonics and carry it up and treat the whole tree, every leaf on the tree, every needle on the tree with it. When you treat a seed, you put it right on the seed, enough to treat the seed and several of the first leaves of the plant. It's a amazing difference, exponential difference to the amount that's used treating a tree and treating seed.
Steve?
We did, for a few years, some of the varieties of squash, we were unable to get treated seed, and we bought untreated seed, and we had very poor germination and very poor luck with a crop.
Steve, I have Nick Pappas. I have a question, and I'm going to ask it in a way that doesn't put you on the spot, but I hope. The conventional farmers in Concord, let's assume most of them are using neonic seed, especially if they're doing corn. Do you think most of them are also using neonic in other ways or only in treated seed?
I think the majority of it's in treated seed. And actually, a lot of varieties of plants are difficult to get in untreated seed. That's the nature of the industry now, that most of the seed is treated. And the seed treatment companies are working to find alternatives. And I think they're experimenting with some, but so far they haven't really replaced neonics. But they are working in that direction. And the pesticide board in Massachusetts is, I think they're meeting next month, actually in March, to consider making neonics a restricted chemical, so that can only be used by registered applicators that presumably are more educated in how it works and use it correctly.
Do you think,
Yeah,
both to Steve and Delia, I guess, I don't know if in the leases with farmers, would it make sense to try to put restrictions on the non-seed use of neonics?
I'm sorry, on what?
Would it make sense to put a restriction or begin to put restrictions on the non-seed use of neonics? So, more general applications or anything like that.
That could be done.
So that wouldn't be harmful to the conventional farmers, you don't think, or if it were done properly?
Well, in some instances, neonics are used, one of the places they used is on potatoes for the potato beetle. And there are very strict recommendations not to use it every year, or the beetles build up resistance. So it's an alternative thing. You use it 1 year and maybe not for a couple years. These are all things that are, all the insects, they're very conscious now of the different modes of treatment and the importance of rotating so that they don't come up with resistance and mutate like the virus has been doing now. It's all a very intricate process nowadays.
Steve, out of interest, what do you grow that doesn't use neonics? Are there other crops that you could put on this particular field next to White Ponds that wouldn't need neonics?
Well, most of the seed we buy is treated with neonics.
Okay.
But that's about the only place we use it.
Okay.
And like I say, that treating a seed for a bean plant or a corn plant is totally different than treating a hemlock tree.
Yeah.
When you're putting it on the surface of the ground to penetrate to the roots and come up and saturate the whole tree, compared to putting right on the seed to treat the seed and the first leaves.
And Judy's points about the cost around all this, that's certainly understand that this is a huge multifactorial issue, I guess.
Steve, if you couldn't use neonics, what would you do, and what would be the ramifications of what you'd do?
Well, currently we'd have trouble buying seed. A lot of varieties of seed wouldn't be available, and some of the seed that you get wouldn't have the germination that you do in treated seed. Some varieties you wouldn't be able to buy because that's the only way they put them out.
Steve, when you mentioned a group meeting to restrict the use of neonic, broadly, is that a state regulatory group that you were referring to?
Yes.
Okay. Delia, I know it doesn't relate necessarily to farmers, but do we restrict our community gardeners from using seeds with neonic?
Well,
and is that something that we should consider doing?
So the gardens are all supposed to be organic gardens, but I think people are not aware, because it's not clear in the seed catalogs, that if you're using something that's treated with neonics, that I think any dahlia that gets planted is they're the certain crops that
dahlias are treated. Yeah. And there's lots of spray. There's lots of sprays that you can buy. Some stores are starting to reduce selling them and be more clear about it. But this is the biggest problem. In private, and we looked into this on the Pollinator Committee, because we would have liked to have done something about that, but you apparently can't actually tell people. In Massachusetts, you can't tell people what to do on their own land.
Right. But I'm talking about the community gardens that we lease from
Oh,
nominal.
I'm sorry. I missed that piece.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, so they are meant to be organic.
Yeah.
And nobody should be using any, and there are many, many, many home products that are full of neonicotinoids.
Yes.
Yeah. Because I was just thinking, if nothing else, it might be a good opportunity, because we're coming up on the growing season, to remind community gardeners of that, and that they should check the seeds and that they're planting. We're pretty good
It
at that.
also seems the public at large, I thinking about it, I didn't think about it, but I mean, just your home, there are there's more land owned by individual residences, I'm sure, in Concord than farmers. And if all of the rest of us are using neonics, it's kind of stupid to tell Steve he can't use neonics.
Well, yeah, so the Pollinator Committee talked about that a lot, and that was a lot to do with why this article came forward the way it did, to increase awareness and start the discussion in Concord so that people were aware.
No, it's certainly well
I guess I would go back to, can't the NRC put into, do something at least, I mean, I know it's small, but at least without community gardens that we, it's for $12 for a half a plot for a year. I mean, we are theoretically leasing those just to make sure the folks who are putting in plants over at, Cousin Fields and all those places are not using anything with the seeds without neonic. The gardeners are pretty good at self-enforcing that nobody uses pesticides.
We do have 2 beekeepers that have hives on our property right near the farm stand. And they're not great beekeepers, but the bees do survive.
Yeah. And the same over behind Marshall Farms too. They got a lot of bees over there.
Okay, is there any other comment, public or otherwise? I see one person out there. Okay. So where does the commission want to head with this? I think, Greg, you brought up the point that it might be a warrant article coming to the town meeting, perhaps. I don't know the status of that. Sarah, do you have any information on that?
Yeah, so the problem is that the committee isn't very functional at the moment, in that they haven't, brought in a new chair. They haven't met really much this year. So I think whilst the intention, would have been to bring it forward, they, as it said, it was an article for last year, and the reason that I, as chair, was comfortable with letting it not be added to the town meeting, because they wanted a reduced number of articles and only the really critical ones because of the situation. And so I was comfortable tabling it, because Delia told me that there was no land that this would apply to at the time. So, it wasn't going to affect anything by waiting another year, but I guess we're at that point now where maybe it does. But what I'm confused about, Delia, if Steve has already leased this land, then this article wouldn't apply to him anyway.
Right.
I think that's the issue, isn't it?
This land just came to the town.
Yeah.
Steve has
Oh,
farmed
it's
it
new.
for
Okay,
the White
got it.
Pond Associates for decades.
Okay.
But now it's under
Oh no, it's the
control.
town. Okay.
I think my lease is irrelevant. I think we should look at it on the basis of what's reasonable.
No, absolutely. Just thinking about, if there's, yeah, okay.
No. So how do people feel about either moving forward or kind of seeing how it plays out in town meeting? Obviously, the growing season's coming upon us, so I'm not sure we want to wait too much longer.
Who owns the field?
The town,
Not the NRC.
the NRC, you do.
Yeah.
So,
I appreciate the input from the Pollinator Committee. I feel that, just a half hour, 45-minute discussion on this amongst a bunch of us who really don't know much about it. It seems like an awfully momentous decision to make that could affect farmers, for us to move forward on this with regards to farmers. I do think it's appropriate perhaps for us to at least inform our community gardeners who are gardening on NRC property to be aware of this and, encourage them not to use seeds that have been treated with neonics. Because they're a private partner. I mean, that's private. That's not a commercial property. It's $25 for a whole plot. It's half the time things don't grow anyway for other reasons.
I'm wondering if a proposal coming from the Agriculture Committee wouldn't be much more powerful than coming from anywhere else. I don't know if it's practical, but the point is that if it's something that the farmers say, what we really care about is seed treatment, and none of it. It turns out nobody in town is doing any general broad applications except maybe one or two crops. There might be some way that the agricultural community could help define a path, or at least set some boundaries on one. I think part of the problem is we just don't know how much it's being used, to what extent. So how do you try to regulate anything you don't understand at all?
Well, that's what
Which is a great question for why this is, that's a challenge for this coming in front of town meeting, in my personal opinion. That's not a.
Well, that's why I'm thinking the farmers. I mean, I felt I learned a little bit from Steve tonight. If somehow you could get in the room all the farmers, or involve the farmers, whether or not they're in the ag committee, so that you could come up with a proposal that made some sense given the agricultural community's use of the products, then you might have a chance of doing something.
So Nick, last year we did talk about working with the Xerces group to do some sort of education in two ways. First of all, for the just general Concord community to understand if they're spraying this all over their yards without even realizing, just making sure that people understand what's in the sprays that you buy at Home Depot and such like, so that they're making informed decisions. But to your point, and then I know we were going to also thinking about there might be another workshop for farmers, but to your point, Nick, I think this is and I don't know if Xerces would be the right group for that now, but I agree that this is clearly such an important, farmers rely on it, and they can't, as you said, you can't just change it, and now you can't even buy seed without it. So there has to be some sort of compromise here.
I will try to get it on the agenda for the next Ag Committee meeting, which is early March. And no, actually, it's coming up next week, I think. I can get it on that meeting.
That makes sense.
It also seems important to follow what that state level group does, because if the state group that registers pesticides in Massachusetts takes action, that's going to that can cover everything, and may lead to us not having to take action in Concord if they're going to.
Well, I think they're going to restrict it for household use, because homeowners are not licensed, and one spray is good and 10 sprays are better. Whereas people who are right, exactly. But people who are using it from, any farmer who's using it, or anybody who's using it on a larger scale has to be licensed and has gone through the training and understands the, the label requirements. So I think that's, important. And I think that's probably a good step, because I think a lot of the exposure, or whatever it is, the presence of it in the environment is coming from people who may not have as sophisticated an understanding of what it does or how bad it can be.
Yeah, and there's a lot more of that land than there is farmland.
Right.
In the aggregate.
Right. I mean, maybe we've got to get something on our webpage, and maybe even talk to the town about getting it on, a link. Educationally, just so that if somebody, and title it some before you use pesticides, read this link rather than say, oh, neonics, and people say, I don't think, I don't have neonics in my stuff. I mean, entice them to just, hit the link and read a few paragraphs so that, because I'll be honest, the problem with the evergreens that Steve mentions, I've used some product. I don't know if it had neonics in it, but they said if you don't use this, that tree's going to die. And
it had neonics.
I know you spread it all over the ground. It's supposed to be the whole circumference. My God, I must have done 30 feet.
Yeah.
So just since Sarah mentioned it, yeah, I was just over a year ago, I had reached out to the Xerces Society about the possibility of doing workshops in Concord, and then the pandemic hit, and so there wasn't any travel. Meetings stopped, so I just dropped the idea at that point. But whether it's them or someone else, I do think education in town for starting with the consumers, the gardeners, is one important place to act.
So Sarah, was that something that the Pollinator Health Advisory Committee was, I know that there was some information that was on the website about the types of products.
Yes, we put together a flyer that did, and actually there's quite a lot of information out there by, I'm trying to think I can follow up with you. There's various links, there's lots of information out there which does have lists of, what garden products you buy that is full of neonics, for example. And we had some examples of types of sprays on a flyer that's on the Pollinator website.
Can I say, we are not allowed, when we use the things that they dab, we're not allowed to deny the use of chemicals in many of the things that come in front of us when people want to use it to kill back invasives and stuff. Why are we allowed to deny the use of a legal chemical on a piece of farmland? Why wouldn't that principle, I'm not saying I'm against restricting it to licensed proper usage, which is what we do when people try to, use the dab method. I can't just go out and buy the chemical and say I'm cutting the stuff down. Would it be okay to have a policy that you have to be a licensed, it has to be done, much like Steve apparently says it's going to happen anyways, that you can use the neonics because they are a legal chemical. But it has to be in a limited fashion, and we could maybe have it say only on the seed. And if they want to do it any other way, it has to come back to us for permission or something of that nature, so that we're governing it without restricting its use completely. Because I don't know how, that just seems like a double standard.
I think the state is going to take care of that. I think that there's movement towards the state making it a restricted pesticide, which
meaning it could only be done by licensed folks.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. I think we'd be on good ground if we said on town land, only licensed people can use neonics. And in order to use them other than seed, you have to come in front of us and explain what you're using them for and how you're using them.
I don't think you can do that. I don't think you're allowed to. A municipality cannot preempt the state governance.
Unless you own the land. I mean, I can tell somebody coming on my property,
okay.
oh, you can't use that.
Good.
Yeah, on town land you could.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
I think that's a great idea.
Anyways.
But town land, well, the town doesn't use neonicotinoids. It's just the farmers who can lease town land.
Right.
The town doesn't use it. The town doesn't use neonics anywhere.
Yeah, we've confirmed that. Yes.
So does it make sense to hold over this to next meeting? Let Steve meet with the ag committee, gather some intelligence, and then kind of report back and consider the motion?
Probably 2 meetings to give them time to meet. And
not enough time, Steve, to meet and also gather
Yeah,
some.
we'll meet next week.
Okay. Yeah, I think it was next, yeah, I think he moved that date up, so. If you're ready, you can contact Delia and maybe pick up the conversation next week or next meeting, all depending on what you run into.
Old home days.
There you go. Okay. Other than that, any other comments on this, or we kind of beat it tonight? So do I have a motion to adjourn?
Oh, we have, hi, Amity, how are you?
Oh, I am sorry.
Our newest trail steward.
Ah.
Oh, neat.
Nice to meet you.
Welcome.
Great.
Hi, nice to meet you all.
Yeah. When did you start?
When did I start? A couple of months ago. I just moved to Concord in mid-October.
Did you have anything that you had any questions about any of the discussion on the neonics?
I'm really interested on the discussion of neonics. I'm an ecologist as my background, so anyway, if you I'd be happy to contribute to any research on that or working on those materials.
So which trails do you focus on? Do you have any specific ones?
Yes, I work on the Emerson Thoreau Amble.
Oh, I love that one.
And also the trying to cover parts of the town forest that the other trail steward doesn't get to.
Yeah. Great.
If I can jump in and say welcome, this is Jane Hotchkiss. I'm on the select board here, and just wanted to quickly chime in after your discussion and your introduction about the neonic and the pollinator committee, because that seems to have gone into hibernation, and I think that clearly this conversation highlights the need to revitalize that conversation space, to take more ownership over it.
Yeah, I think that's what you heard tonight, Jane. I think we'd agree with that. Okay. Any other things, or we're going to make a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Okay, we'll take a quick vote. Sarah?
Aye.
Greg? Judy?
Aye.
Nick?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well. Thank you, guys. We'll see you in a couple
Thanks,
weeks.
everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.